So I want to start out this week. I want to put something in your mind, and we're going to pick it up later. I'll bring it back around. But first, I want you to think about who is the most wretched person you can think of. Like, who's the person that comes to mind that you think, man, that person's too far from God's grace. There is just no way God could save them. Like, you know what? Look, let's put our halos to the side, right? I mean, obviously we would say, hopefully, that no one's too far from God's grace, but there's always that disclaimer, right? Like, I'm sure, after 9/11, maybe some of you would have said Osama bin Laden's too far from God's grace, or Hitler, or just fill in the blank. Who is that for you that you think is too far from God's grace? Now, I want you to keep that person, just hang on to it, because that's really where we're headed here in Luke 5. Now, if you remember, the last few weeks we've been focused on this story about the paralytic. His boys let him down through the roof. There was so much from that story that God used. It was awesome. And so it's a magnificent event, right? This big event where this guy was healed. Now, we're about to leave that event. Okay, so leaving in Luke 5, we're going to go on. In 26, it says, "In amazement seized them all. They glorified God and were filled with awe, saying, 'We've seen extraordinary things today.'" Like, their minds were blown, right? This dude gets up and gone. So an incredible moment. But then it goes on in verse 27. It says, after this magnitude of an event, after this, he went out and saw a tax collector. He saw a tax collector named Levi sitting at the tax booth. And he said, "Follow me." And leaving everything, he rose and followed him. Like, that's a big deal. There's a lot in here I want to look at. Number one, he went out and saw a tax collector named Levi. Now, I know instantly you're thinking, okay, so he ran into this IRS agent named Levi, said, "Hey, why don't you go with me?" And Levi left and followed him. A lot more to the story than that. You see, tax collectors were some of the most vile, hated people at that time. Because tax collectors, they worked for the Roman government, and they were taking unfair taxes. They were using and abusing the Jewish people. People hated tax collectors. They were some of the most despised people on the planet. And yet here's Jesus, goes to this tax collector named Levi and says, "Hey bro, follow me." And then Levi leaves everything and follows him. Like, that's a big deal when you look at through the context of what is happening in the storyline of Scripture. When it looks like Pharisees, for example, who they would talk to, who they wouldn't talk to. Here is a person that's openly ripping people off, and Jesus invites him. Doesn't just say, "Hey, why don't you go to church? Hey, why don't you get your stuff figured out? Hey, why don't you quit ripping people off?" No, he says, "Hey, follow me. Follow me." And that's something to hang on to. Jesus didn't tell Levi, "Hey, dude, you're going to have to quit your job first. Hey man, you're gonna have to kind of leave the organization that you're with. Hey, you're gonna have to do all these things." No, Jesus looks at Levi and says, "Hey, follow me." But what I want to look at too is, what was Levi's response? Levi's response, and leaving everything, he rose and followed him. He left everything. Like, being a tax collector, you had some wealth, right? Because you had a tax to charge people from the Roman government. But then what they would do is they would charge above and beyond that tax, hence ripping the people off. And so no doubt Levi got tons of cash laying around. He's got it all. He's got prestige, he's got money, he's in with the government. Like, he's in a good spot in life. And Jesus is like, "Come, follow me." And so Levi leaves it all to follow Jesus. Now, that's important because you know what? That's an example that nobody's too far from God's grace. And look what Jesus does. He doesn't tell him, "Get your crap figured out." No, he says, "Come, follow me. We'll worry about the rest later. It's okay." And so I don't know who needs to hear this today, or who needs to be reminded of this, that nobody's too far from God's grace. Nobody. So whoever that is in your mind, pray for them. Pray for them. And I know that's not easy. Believe me, there's people in my life I don't want to pray for. I'll pray a prayer of David, like break the teeth of the wicked, but I don't want to pray for them. But I need to, and I will. And so the one other thing I want to just remind you of, this Levi, right? He was a tax collector ripping people off, follows Jesus, one of the disciples. He wrote a book called Matthew. right? One of the most influential books in the Gospels. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, right? 4 stories of Jesus's life, and he is one of them. And so God took this despised human being that nobody liked and used him in a mighty, mighty way to proclaim his kingdom. And so I don't know what that looks like for you. I don't know what that looks like for the people you're thinking of that are too far from God's grace, but God has a massive plan, and there isn't a single heart in this world that God can't change. Anyway, y'all, thanks for being with us. And hey, 30 days of prayer. Thanks for joining us on this journey. Keep praying 12-12, set an alarm. We've got the prayer calendar that you can look at. I believe yesterday was Fan Outreach. Today, I believe, was Hoonkos. I forgot to look at it before the video. Forgive me. It's not 12-12 yet. But anyway, if you don't know what I'm talking about, review our previous post. Download that prayer calendar today. Have a great day, y'all.